The French Revolution. French society during the late 18th century, the Society of States was a part of the feudal system. The term old regime is usually used to describe the society and the institution of France before 1789. Society was divided into three parts. The first state, second state, and the third state. First state consists clergy, those enjoyed privilege by birth. Second state consists of nobility, enjoyed privileges by birth, enjoyed feudal privileges. Then comes third state, big businessmen, merchants, courts, officials, lawyers, etc., peasants and artisans, small peasants, landless laborers and servants. Peasants were forced to provide services to the lords, to work in his fields and houses, his fields and houses, serve in army and participate in building roads. Burden of taxes was borne by the third state. The struggle to survive, rapid increase in population, rapid increase in demand for food grains, wages could not match rising prices, drought or hail further made the situation worse. Outbreak of subsistence crisis. Growing middle class. The 18th century witnessed the emerge of social groups termed as middle class. They earned their wealth through trade and from manufacturing goods like silk and woolen textile. There were also professionals in this group like lawyers and administrative officials. They all believed in the idea of privileges on merit, not on birth. These ideas were based on freedom and equal laws and opportunities for all in a society. These ideas were based on freedom and equal laws and opportunities for all in a society. These ideas were highlighted by philosophers like John Locke in his book Two Treatises of Government, then Jean-Jacques Rousseau in his book The Social Contract, and the last Montesquieu in his book The Spirit of the Laws. The outbreak of a revolution in 1789, Louis XVI called together an assembly of the state journal to pass proposal for new taxes. The first and the second state sent 300 representatives each who were seated in rows facing each other, and 600 members of the third state had to stand at the back. Peasants, artisans, and women were denied entry to the assembly. In the past, voting was conducted on the notion that each state as a whole had one vote. But members of the third state demanded that each individual should be given a right to vote. This was one of the democratic principles by Rousseau written in his book The Social Contract. When their proposal was rejected by the king, Louis XVI, the members of the third states walked out of the assembly in protest. The third state declared themselves as the National Assembly and drafted the constitution for France, which limited the powers of the monarch. There was an outbreak on the streets where crowds of angry women stormed into the shops. After spending hours in long queues at the bakery, Louis XVI, after facing the revolting subject, recognized the National Assembly and also accepted that his powers would be checked by the Constitution. On the eighth night, the tennis court oath, the third state representatives viewed themselves as spokesmen for the whole French nation. They assembled in the hall of an indoor tennis court in the grounds of Versailles on 20th June 1789. There they declared themselves as a national assembly. They saw not to disperse until they had drafted a constitution which would limit the powers of the monarch. The prominent leaders of the National Assembly were Mirabeau and Avesseau. Thus, they helped in the awakening of the French people to revolt against the oppression of the privileged classes, and this ultimately led to the French Revolution. Recognition of the National Assembly. Louis XVI finally recognized the National Assembly as a legal body. 4th August 1789, the National Assembly passed a decree removing the federal system. Members of the church forced to give up their privileges, removal of taxes, and confiscation of land owned by the churches. The Constitutional Monarchy of France. In 1791, completion of the draft of the Constitution limited on the powers of the monarch. Powers democrated and distributed among the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. Citizens voted for a group of electors who in turn chose the assembly, means had the power to make laws. And active citizens, and then who are the active citizens? People who were allowed to vote, only men above 25 years of age who paid taxes equal to at least 3 days of labor's wages. Passive citizens, the remaining men and women who were not entitled to vote. The Constitution started with the Declaration of the Right of Man and Citizen. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. In 1789, the French National Assembly adopted a set of basic principles called the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen that was proposed by Lafayette and based on the ideas of Locke, Montesquieu, and Jefferson. This document states that men are born free, remain free and equal in right, and that the source of power resides in people. It guaranteed all Frenchmen the basic rights of liberty, security, equal justice, fair taxes, and the freedom of speech, religion, and thoughts. Recognition of the National Assembly. Louis XVI finally recognized the National Assembly as a legal body. 4th August 1789, the National Assembly passed a decree removing the federal system. Members of the church forced to give up their privileges, removal of taxes, and confiscation of land owned by the churches. The Jacobin Club comprised members from the less prosperous section of society, included small shopkeepers, artisans, servants, daily wage workers, etc., led by Maximilian Robespierre, wore long striped trousers announcing the end of the power of the nobles who wore knee breeches and red caps symbolizing liberty, also known as sans-culottes. The removal of monarchy in France. France became a republic. April 1792, the National Assembly voted to declare war against Prussia and Austria. Thousands of volunteers joined the army, viewed as a war of the people against kings and autocracy all over the world. Marquée as the national anthem of France. Revolution to be carried forward as the Constitution accorded political rights only to the richer section of the society. Political clubs as centers of discussion and planning future actions. Formation of Jacobin Club. 10th August 1792, storming of the palace of the Tuileries, king held as hostage. Vote by the assembly to imprison the royal family. Election held. all men above 21 years, regardless of wealth, got the right to vote. Convention, newly elected assembly, 21st September 1792, abolition of monarchy and France declared as a republic. 21st January 1793, execution of Louis XVI. Reign of Terror 1793 to 94. Robespierre ruled over France. Followed a several policies of control and punishment. Arrested, trials, executions of his enemies and opponents by a revelatory tribunal included Queen Maria and around 15,000 people. Issued laws placing maximum ceiling on wages and prices, peasants forced to transport their produce to the cities at fixed prices, ban on the use of more expensive white flour, rationing of bread and meat, people required to eat quality bread. All French men and women were called citizen and citizen people, respectively, instead of Monsieur and Madame. Restlessness pursued of his policies, moderation demanded by supporters. 28 July 1794, execution of Robespierre. Rule of the Directory. End of the Reign of Terror after the execution of Robespierre. Power seized by the wealthier middle class. 1795, framing of a new constitution denied the right to vote to non-proprietary section of society. Two legislative councils who appointed the Directory, a committee of 5 members which had executive powers and which often clashed with the legislative councils, led to political instability and the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte. Rule of women in revolution. Women were active participants of French Revolution, wanted the revolutionary government to introduce measures to improve their lives, didn't have access to education, were paid low wages as compared to men, began their own clubs and newspapers to discuss and voice their opinions. Most famous club, the Society of Republican Women, demanded the right to vote and representation in politics. Introduction of laws by revolutionary government in the early years to help improve the lives of women. Laws included compulsory schooling, no forced marriage, divorce as legal, training for jobs, etc. Reign of Terror, closing of women's club and ban on their political activities, arrests and executions of many women activists. Women's struggle for political equality continued down the years. Napoleon as the Emperor. In 1804, Napoleon crowned himself the Emperor of France, conquered the neighboring European countries, created kingdoms, placing the members of his family as the kings, saw himself as the modernizer of Europe, introduced many laws such as the protection of private property and the uniform system of weights and measures based on the decimal system. Viewed as a liberator, initially